Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's begin today's session of comprehensive news analysis with this first article, which talks about the recently held plenum, that is, a meeting of all the senior officials of the Chinese Communist Party in China. Now, this meeting led to the party finalizing the contents of a historical resolution that they will pass in the next year's conference. This article in itself gives you a lot of intricate details about China's leadership, about the role that the Chinese Communist Party plays, and what exactly are the takeaways from this particular session. So, rather than making it all complicated and trying to make you understand the working of the Chinese Communist Party, let me try and simplify this for you. Now, as you know, the Chinese Communist Party was founded by Mao Zedong, who was the first big leader of China. So much so that even today, China swears by the policies of Mao Zedong in many areas. Mao Zedong, in fact, was given a title called Hemsman, meaning more than a leader. After Mao Zedong, the next big leader that China had was Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping was a person behind China's modernization. It was him in 1978 who announced that China will now modernize with all its force and will be at par with the Western nations. The third big leader in China's history is Xi Jinping, who now controls the fortunes of the Chinese Communist Party and the entire country. So, this article tells us about these three big leaders of the Chinese Communist Party, that is, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, and Xi Jinping. It highlights how Xi Jinping has risen in stature so much so that he is now regarded in an equal position as Mao Zedong. And I will give you examples of how Xi Jinping has reached that level. Before that, let me tell you an interesting incident of 2014. In 2014, the Chinese President Xi Jinping visited India. And on the day when he was landing in India, a poor Doordarshan news reader pronounced his name as 11 Jinping. That is 11 Jinping. Now, I'm sure that lady did not do it on purpose, but she was fired from her job in Doordarshan because she did not know how to pronounce the name of the Chinese president. As you can see, China can be extremely dangerous. The Chinese president can even take away your job without even meeting you. Anyway, coming back to the original story. Now, Deng Xiaoping, when he was in power in the 1970s and 1980s, had made a rule that the Chinese president will have a maximum of two-term limit. But for Xi Jinping, especially, this limit has been taken off, meaning that Xi Jinping can now remain the president of China till the time that he wants to. In fact, many people now have started to call him the president for life. This has never happened with any of the earlier Chinese presidents. Also, when Deng Xiaoping was in power, he argued that the best way to take the country forward is through collective leadership. That is, multiple leaders from the Chinese Communist Party should be empowered to take decisions for the betterment of the country. Xi Jinping, on the other hand, has a very different style of working. Right now, if I ask you about the main leaders of China, you might not know the name of anyone else apart from Xi Jinping because that is his style of working, that is of individual leadership, just like Mao Zedong. After Mao Zedong, Xi Jinping is the second person to have been given this position of helmsman. That makes him much more than just the president of China. Now, why is this important and how is it relevant to us? The Chinese Communist Party, whenever they have such kind of meetings, just like other political parties, they also pass their resolutions. However, in the history of their party, they have only passed two historic resolutions till now, and now they will be passing a third historic resolution. The first resolution was actually passed in 1945. This historical resolution said that Mao Zedong is our whole soul leader. Whatever he says will be the final word of policy making in China. Anyone who opposes him will not be considered as a part of the party. So, the first historical resolution was to give complete power in the hands of Mao Zedong without having any competition. The second historical resolution was passed in 1981 under Deng Xiaoping. What was this? This was an introspection into the errors that China had made during the time of Mao Zedong, especially during the time of Cultural Revolution. Now, Cultural Revolution is said to be a period in China between 1966 and 1976 in which Mao Zedong occupied an extremely powerful position in the country and got rid of all his opponents. Anyone who used to speak against Mao Zedong's policies was either jailed or even worse, sentenced to death. This period of cultural revolution is said to have taken lakhs of lives in China of people who were not in favor of the Communist Party and Mao's policies. The 1981 resolution was an introspection, accepting that there were wrong things that happened during the Cultural Revolution. The third historical resolution will now be passed by the party in the next year's plenum, for which they have finalized the content already. And what will that be? That will be giving an equal stature to Xi Jinping as Mao Zedong. An official document titled Xi Jinping's Thought will be enforced in China. The only other persons whose thoughts have been enforced till now is Mao Zedong. So after Mao Zedong's thought, the next person whose thoughts will officially become a part of China's policy making will be Xi Jinping. That indicates the rise of Xi Jinping in Chinese politics ever since he has taken power. Now, Xi Jinping in itself is a very interesting case study. He has been using the Chinese nationalism to get a support from people around the country. Now, what does that mean? That means that leaders around the world, when they come to power, think that in order to gain maximum support from their people, they have to make them believe in the cause of nationalism. They have to make the people of their country believe that we are in danger, that the entire world is against us, we are the best kind of people, and we all need to come together to fight for our nation's pride. That is what the idea of Chinese nationalism is, and that is what has been happening in China. The Chinese Communist Party has been propagating the idea of Chinese nationalism. And I will give you a few examples from international media. The biggest Chinese hit movie this year is named Battle at Lake Changjin. Now, what exactly is this? This is a historical battle that China had to fight in the Korean War against Korea and the US, in which China turned out to be victorious in the end. There was a movie made on this battle, which has been promoted by the Chinese government and has become an extremely big and hit movie in China. Xi Jinping has also recently started Red Tourism projects. What are these? Under these projects, people are encouraged to visit museums about Chinese history, to visit the city where Mao Zedong used to live, so that people are in touch with China's history and China's old struggle against the Western powers. And I will give you one more example. There's a very famous ice cream brand in China. Even on the wrappers of the ice cream brand, there are slogans about revolutions. There are slogans about how China is fighting against the Western powers so that they can influence the minds even of their children. A few years back, China passed a law for criminalizing slandering of Chinese heroes, meaning that any person in China raising questions on the heroes of Chinese Communist Party will be jailed by 3 years. Not just this, even if someone in China asks the government how many of our soldiers were killed in the Galwan Valley clash against India, even on that the person can be jailed for 3 years. Thus, the Chinese president, like all other dictators in the past, is using nationalism as a way to gather support from as many people as possible in China, and it is actually working. History tells us how nationalism brings the people of the country together. We have seen it in case of Benito Mussolini in Italy. We have seen this in case of Adolf Hitler in Germany. And let me give you another example. Russia in the beginning of the 20th century was ruled by the Tsars. Tsar was a name given to the Russian king. Now, the Russian people were very angry with the Tsar because of high taxes, because of no jobs, because of no development. So, the Russian Tsar had an idea that to distract the people from questioning my role, let me play the card of nationalism. Let me bring all of them together. How? The Tsar thought, let me go on a war with a small country which is Japan. We will defeat them and then it will bring all the country together. It will be the Russian pride. The Tsar thus fought a war with Japan, and what happened? Russia, led by Tsar, in fact lost the 1905 war, with Japan becoming the first Asian country to defeat such a big country in a war. So the idea of nationalism did not work out the way he wanted, but at least his intention was the same as with Xi Jinping. And that is why India has to be on its toes, because China right now is playing the nationalism card at every step. The next article that we have for you today focuses on the health insurance coverage in India, and it is based on a new report given by the Niti Aayog. So, Niti Aayog, about a couple of weeks back, published a report titled Health Insurance for India's Missing Middle. So, the idea is that health insurance coverage in India still remains a distinct dream. While the poor people in India have been covered under the Ayushman Bharat Yojana, the richer people in India either buy the medical insurance themselves or they are given a medical insurance by their employer. But the middle class in India is the one that is left out of the insurance coverage. So, how to cover this middle class so that their out of pocket expenditure in case of a medical emergency reduces? This is what the article is all about. Now, the reality is in India, we don't give a lot of importance to medical insurance. Not just insurance, we don't even give a lot of importance to visiting a doctor. You would have seen in your household when someone falls ill, going to the doctor is absolutely the last option. We think that we know the best. In every household, there is a medical box in which you have a lot of unused tablets and capsules from the last time when you were ill. So the moment someone has a fever, the moment someone has an upset stomach, you open up that box, see what tablets and capsules you have, and you pop in one of them. Or the second option is you go to a medical store, you ask the person, what can I have? Or the third option is you will call your relative or your friend and ask him, when you were ill, what medicine did you take? After all that happens, then we think, oh, should I go to a doctor also? So going to the doctor anyway is the last option in the minds of Indians, which is extremely dangerous. Now, why is that so? Number one, it is expensive because most people are not covered with medical insurance. Secondly, even when people are covered with medical insurance, most insurance companies will not reimburse you for doctor consultation. In order to get money from insurance companies, you have to get admitted into the hospital. So, all that combined means that India is facing a big problem of universal health coverage. The people who already have health coverage, even they don't take much advantage of it. And the people who don't have health coverage avoid visiting doctor or hospital unless the situation becomes extremely bad. Now, the Niti Aayog report says that the solution to this problem is that the people themselves from the middle class should be encouraged to take a medical insurance by paying for the premium. Rather than asking the government to step in, it should be better if the middle class themselves pay for this. The author here, who is a doctor and a health policy expert, does not agree with this. The author says that across the world, in any country, wherever there is a successful model of universal health coverage, it has only been made possible when the government intervenes in this matter. Depending upon the private sector, will only make things worse. The Niti Aayog report says that the government should take steps to reduce the premium of health insurance coverage, make sure that there are basic plans that are offered by the insurance companies so that anyone from the middle class can take a plan for the entire family without spending too much money from the pocket. Thirdly, the OPD expenses, that is, the consultation expenses of the doctors, should also be included, because in your treatment, if you don't get admitted to the hospital, the biggest part of your expense is the doctor consultation, which is usually not included in the insurance policies. Even if some insurance policies do include it, they want the person to pay the money upfront to the doctor and the company will then reimburse it. That is not the best way forward. The author says that we can take example of Switzerland. where the government has made it mandatory to have a basic health insurance. Just like in India, it is mandatory to have an insurance for your bike or your car if you're driving it in the open. The same can be done for medical health insurance as well. Now, if you have traveled to a foreign country, for example, when you go to Europe or you go to US, along with the visa papers, another document which is compulsory for you is health insurance. So if you go to US for traveling even for 1 week, it is compulsory for you to take an insurance, because the US government says that when you come to US and you fall ill, we don't want to provide you treatment from our pocket. So you should have your health insurance and only then you can come to the US. It is a law with most countries if you travel abroad. Now let's try and go beyond the article and see how big is the problem of universal health insurance in India. The out of pocket expenditure, that is OOPE, in India is amongst the highest in the entire world. I have taken this data from the World Bank. As you can see, if a person is spending 100 rupees on his medical expenses in India, out of 163 rupees mostly are being spent out of the person's pocket, and maybe 37 rupees are given by the insurance companies. The world average here is that a person should only spend about 18 rupees out of 100 from his or her own pocket. In India, this number is significantly higher because people are mostly not covered with insurance policy, and even if they are, a lot of expenses are not covered under that. The Niti Aayog report that the write-up talks about is not a long report. If you go to the website of Niti Aayog, it's just a 64-page report. And out of these 64 pages, also the actual report actually starts from the 12th or the 13th page. So from that report, I took this graph to show you how many people are still without any insurance in India. While 49 crore people are covered under the Ayushman Bharat scheme, another 20 crore people are covered under the schemes run by different state governments in India. Then we have a proportion of people who have taken insurance either by themselves or through their employers. However, there are still over 40 crore people in India who do not have any insurance, who are called as the missing middle. Now, there are some other aspects of this problem that you need to understand. First, there are government hospitals where you can go and you can have your treatment without any cost. However, we all know the situation of the infrastructure in the government hospitals across the country. The reason for that is Indian government's spending on health is one of the lowest in the world. That is only about 1.5% of the GDP. Although universal health care is a part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that is goal number 3, but we are still a long way away from achieving that. There is another myth here that I would like to break for you guys. There are many countries in the world, there are many developed nations in the world where governments provide free healthcare to the people. Let's take an example of Australia. So, Australia spends billions of dollars to provide free healthcare to their citizens. However, that does not always mean that it is the best way forward. For example, there is a study in Australia that shows that people who go to have surgery or who go to have treatment through their government insurance plan will have to face a much longer waiting time period as compared to those who opt to get treatment by spending privately. So for the same surgery, you might have to wait for about 240 days if you are on a public insurance. If you are paying privately, you might not even have to wait for 100 days for the same surgery. That is an example of Australia. So if you are being asked about solutions for universal health coverage, please make sure you understand that just by government covering for you for universal health insurance doesn't mean that you will always get your treatment in the shortest amount of time. The next article again takes us back to the ongoing blame game in Delhi and nearby areas on the pollution problem. A couple of days back, we discussed about the pollution problem in Delhi and the components that make up this particular problem. This small article tells us about the blame game that is happening between the political parties and between different states, with people coming out with different explanations for this pollution. Some people blame the stubble burning farmers, while some other people put all the blame on Diwali crackers. Road dust, as we saw in the IIT Kanpur report, is also one of the major components of this pollution, and also vehicular emission. Now, if we have discussed all of this earlier, why are we discussing this today? Because today, I want you to understand the stubble burning problem in a new way. All of us keep on blaming the farmers about stubble burning, and we blame the government for not stopping the farmers from doing so. So let's try and understand what this problem is and how bad is it hurting India. Essentially, stubble is a leftover from the rice. When farmers cultivate paddy, they take out rice, and then the leftover material which is not usable is called stubble. The farmers burn the stubble on their field so that the field is ready for the next cycle of crops where they can cultivate the wheat. This is the basic information that you need to understand. Now, understand this. To produce about 1 ton of rice, we require 70,000 tons of water. Now, in the year 2020, India exported a record 14.7 million tons of rice, out of which about 10 million tons was non basmati and the remaining was basmati. Now, let's keep the basmati rice apart for some time because it is a good export. It gives you a good rate. It usually is exported at near about 72 rupees per kg. But the non basmati rice that we are exporting usually gives us a rate of 22 to 24 rupees per kg. The reason why we have to export such a lot of non basmati rice is because farmers in India, specifically in Punjab and Haryana, cultivate so much rice, so much more than what we require, that we have no other option but to export it. Now, just understand this: exporting 10 million tons of non basmati rice means exporting 10 million into 70,000 tons of water that has been used to cultivate that rice. Now, let's go ahead and trace why this water was used. Farmers do not have any limit on how much groundwater that they can use. Most states like Punjab and Haryana give free power to the farmers to run their tube well. So they can run their tube well, take out water from the ground, use it for rice production, and because they have gotten used to it, they know how to cultivate rice. Rice is also easily procured by the Food Corporation of India at the MSP. So everyone is in their comfort zone with rice cultivation. Farmers are growing rice much more than what the people of the country require. Food Corporation of India also buys it because the government has promised to buy it at the MSP. This is leading to depleting groundwater. We have seen multiple reports of Niti Aayog about how the groundwater in India is depleting at an extremely fast pace. Add to this problem another interesting law that was passed by Punjab and Haryana separately at about the same time. So in 2009, these two state governments passed a law under which they said that farmers can only plant paddy, that is rice, from mid June onwards. So earlier, the farmers used to plant paddy in April or in the beginning of May. But the state governments made this law that the farmers can only plant paddy from mid June onwards. Why? Because mid June onwards, monsoon starts to arrive. When the monsoon starts to arrive, they would have more water and they would not have to take out water from the ground. On the other hand, in April, May, when the farmers used to cultivate paddy earlier, they had to take most of the water out of the ground. Now, this means that they are cultivating paddy at a later stage, means they will have to harvest it later on, that is in October. Earlier, rice used to be harvested in September. Now, when you are telling the farmers that you can only harvest rice in late October, means that after harvesting, they don't have a lot of time between harvesting this rice and making the field ready for the next harvest for the wheat. In this little amount of time, the only option that the poor farmers have is that they have to burn the stubble and they can't transport it anywhere. The other problem is in mid October and early November, when this burning starts, the wind pattern over Delhi becomes extremely stationary, meaning that all the smoke from stubble burning over Punjab and Haryana does not travel a long distance and becomes stationary over Delhi because the wind patterns over Delhi in this time period are extremely stationary. If this would have been done, let's say in September, then the wind would have been much stronger and Delhi would not have had to face such problem. Now you see from beginning till the end how the problem is more man made because of our decisions rather than blaming the nature for it. Now, what exactly is the solution? There are two ideas that can be implemented here. Number one, the farmers can be encouraged and pushed towards maize cultivation. Number one, we don't need as much rice. The government godowns are right now filled with rice and we don't even know what to do with it. Maize, on the other hand, can be used for converting into ethanol and then mixing it with petrol, just like the US is doing on a very large scale. Secondly, a few years back, the World Bank started a pilot program in Punjab called Pani Bachao, Paisa Banao. Under this, the farmers were told that we are giving you electricity for free. But if you use less electricity, then we will pay you money. How? For example, every farmer was given 1000 unit of electricity for their tube bill. The farmers were told if out of these 1000 units you only use 800, then we will pay you an incentive for not using the 200 units. Or if you use only 600 units, then we will pay you more incentive for not using the 400 units. That's a pilot program that World Bank launched in Punjab. Those kind of programs can also be expanded to tackle this particular problem. The next article that we have takes us back to the problems that the tribal community is facing, especially in the state of Tamil Nadu. The recently released Tamil movie Jai Bhim that talks about the discrimination faced by tribals, especially in Tamil Nadu, such as the Irula tribal community, has brought to light again the existing problem. The authors of this article, based in Tamil Nadu, have tried to highlight the problem in the state and the role that the fifth schedule can play in ensuring that this problem goes away. The authors tell us that the government of India has passed multiple laws for giving the rights over land to the tribal community, but on ground, the implementation of these laws has remained lackluster. For example, in 2006, the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Act was passed, under which the scheduled tribes were to be given ownership over the land where they live. However, in Tamil Nadu, for the next 10 years, no ownership was given because a Madras High Court had banned giving any new land titles. Thus, any impact that this law should have had on the tribal community was negated by this decision of the Madras High Court. The problem of the tribal community has increased much more after the LPG reforms. Ever since India has liberalized its market, a lot of corporates from outside India are entering India and have their eyes set on the mineral resources in the tribal areas, especially. Thus, a lot of tribal people are being displaced from their land for either the mineral resources or in the name of development. The authors call this development induced displacement. Ideally, the people who are being displaced should be given adequate amount of compensation and adequate amount of land to build their house somewhere else, but that has not been done. The Constitution of India under the 5th and the 6th schedules do give certain rights to the tribal community in India, but on ground it has not had the kind of impact that it should have. Tamil Nadu, anyway, is not a part of any of these two schedules. So the tribal community in Tamil Nadu still remains without the rights that they deserve. Now, I'm sure in Indian polity, all of you would have read about the fifth schedule. In 2009, the Mungekar committee said that fifth schedule is a constitution within a constitution itself. How? The fifth schedule allows the President of India to demarcate an area and call it a scheduled area. Now, the constitution does not say on what criteria will an area be called a scheduled area. But in 1960-61, the Debar committee suggested four criteria based on which an area can be certified as a scheduled area. These four are: preponderance of tribes in the population, means most of the people living in the area should be of tribal community. Second, compact and reasonable size of the area. Third, the area should be underdeveloped as compared to the other nearby areas. And fourth, the people living in this area should be of lower economic standard as compared to the other people. The authors also point out that the tribal population in Tamil Nadu per se is pretty low, that is only 1.1% of the entire population of the state. However, there are certain blocks where the tribal population is significantly higher, and in those blocks, the overall literacy rate is comparatively much lower than the literacy rate seen across the state. Thus, the authors demand that in order to improve the condition of people living in these areas, we should think about including Tamil Nadu in the fifth schedule states so that the areas where over half of the population is tribal should be made a part of the schedule areas, and proper safeguards should be provided to them by the government. In yesterday's discussion, if you remember, we had discussed about the different initiatives taken by the government of India for the welfare of the tribal population across the country. We discussed about the Vandhan Yojana, we discussed about the goal scheme, we also discussed about the tri-food initiative by the government, which are focused specifically on the tribal population. It is also important to understand the discrepancy that is seen in the literacy rates of the tribal community. As you can see, while the average literacy rate of India is 73%, the same amongst the tribal community is only 59%. The situation amongst the females is even worse. Even though there are provisions of seats being reserved for scheduled tribes in education institutions and government jobs, many of these seats over the years have remained vacant. In fact, there was a report in March of this year that said that 81% seats reserved for scheduled tribe students in the PhD courses in the IITs are still vacant. Not just this, across the IIMs in India, there are 24 positions reserved for the members of scheduled tribe community. Of these 24 positions, 19 are vacant, and only 5 of these seats have been filled, which highlights the fact that just by giving a provision for reservation, we cannot expect the situation of the scheduled tribes to become better. There is still a big gap between realizing the potential of the scheduled tribe community and bringing them to the mainstream. The next article is based on the recently held meeting of presiding officers in which the Prime Minister of India gave certain suggestions. We will discuss those suggestions and also try and discuss the reforms needed in the legislatures in India. The Prime Minister said it is time to have one nation, one legislative portal, means a single portal which will have information about the parliament and all the state legislatures across the country. For example, if I have to research about a bill passed by the Haryana legislature or by Rajasthan or Telangana legislature, there should be one single portal where I should go and get all that information. The Prime Minister also said the people who are becoming MPs or MLAs or MLCs for the first time should be given proper training about how they should behave in the House. The Prime Minister suggested that there should be a model document which should contain rules for all the legislatures across the country. Rather than having different types of rules in the state legislatures and in the parliament, we should have similar rules. Also, the legislature must adopt the use of new technology to improve their efficiency, and the Prime Minister also asked the state legislatures to ensure that old and redundant laws which are not useful now should be taken out and repealed just like the parliament does. It is to be noted that from 2014 and 19, the parliament repealed about 1500 old laws. It is a very common practice. Every year, the government passes a bill which contains a list of those laws which the government wants to repeal, which have become redundant or are not useful now. Now, this is what the Prime Minister said in his speech. This gives us a chance to look at the present working of the parliament. What are the shortcomings, and are there any suggestions that we have for improving the working of the parliament? In 2019, Vice President Venkaiah Naidu gave a 15-point reform charter about how to improve the working of the parliament. Out of those 15, these are the significant ones. He said that the legislators must have at least 50% attendance and their parties should ensure that. Just imagine you being a college student and your principal telling you, please at least have 50% attendance, if not more. Then the vice president said that we need to review the anti defection law to give more freedom to the members of parliament. There should be special courts set up to expedite the cases of MPs and MLAs. We need to reduce the number of MPs and MLAs with a criminal background. We should talk about simultaneous elections. Parliamentary committees should be made much more effective, and the representation of women in the legislatures also should increase. Over here, let me tell you something interesting and rather unfortunate. In 2015, the former president of India, APJ Abdul Kalam, passed away while he was giving a lecture at IIT Guwahati. In that lecture to the students, he had asked the students to mail him their suggestions on how to improve the working of the parliament. How can we make the parliament more efficient? And how can we increase the number of working hours? Just imagine, even his last thoughts were about how to improve the working of the parliament in India. Now, what exactly are the suggestions? This was the problem statement. The suggestion can be having a UK model. Now, what exactly is a UK model and how is it different? In India, one of the reasons why our parliament sees a lot of disruptions is because the government and the opposition are not able to come to a common conclusion. This can be rectified by the UK model. So in UK, the parliament meets for over 100 days in a year. Out of those 100 days, the opposition parties get 20 days in which they will decide the agenda for discussion. In India, right now, it is the government who decides the agenda for discussion every single day. Out of these 20 days, 17 days are given to the main opposition party, 3 days are given to the second largest opposition party. Not just this, the decisions that are taken on the day of the opposition are not binding on the government. But at least it gives a chance to the opposition parties to run the parliament and tell the people of the country what are their ideas. Also, the Prime Minister is bound to respond to questions that are asked to him by the members of parliament in UK, not in India. Canada also has a similar concept where they have opposition days, but again, that has not been done in India. So, this is a suggestion that can be implemented in India to improve the ongoing problem. These were the articles that we had for you from the Hindu newspaper today. Now, a couple of mains practice questions. Number one, we can't afford any more delays in introducing reforms in our parliamentary system. Do you agree? Give suggestions regarding such reforms. Second, throw light on the roadblocks in India's journey towards achieving universal health coverage. Also suggest possible ways to get rid of these roadblocks. Both of these questions have to be answered within 250 words. Thank you so much for watching the video.